Good afternoon. It is my immense pleasure to take this opportunity to welcome you all here today for the workshop series on research and publication of the IRCHSS 2023. International Research Conference on Humanities and Social Sciences, which is organized by the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences of the University of Sri Jawatanapura, is an event that has attracted both local and international scholars over the last few years. The year 2023 will be the 8th academic address of IRCHSS, and it aims to provide a platform for renowned intellectuals and emerging scholars to exchange and share their experiences and research on all aspects of humanities and social sciences. As you may know, this is the third workshop of our workshop series under the title Critical Evaluation of Your Abstract or Paper, which considered with how a conference abstract or journal paper is evaluated by reviewers. You will be trained on how to read the mind of reviewers and prepare your abstract and papers accordingly. Before starting the session, there's a small notice for all the participants. To reduce the disturbances, we have muted your microphones. So if you have any concerns or questions, please use your raise hand option. Also, we are giving time for the discussion at the end of the workshop. So first, I would like to invite Dr. Tharanga Veerasurya, Conference Chair of the IRCHSS 2023, to deliver the welcome address. Sir, over to you.
Okay, so thank you, Kanishka. Venerable monks, resource persons, and the participants of the workshops, I warmly welcome you to the third workshop on research writing and publication in association with the IRCHSS 2023. The workshop today, which is on critical evaluation of your abstract paper, is conducted by Dr. Patrick Faulkner of the Department of Archaeology of the University of Sydney. The workshop today deals with how a conference, abstract, or a journal paper is evaluated by reviewers. In this workshop, we hope to train you on how to read the minds of reviewers and prepare your abstract or papers accordingly. We had the first workshop on abstract writing conducted by Professor Venerable Pinnawala Sangasumanathero on Friday. The second workshop, which is on research design, conducted by Professor Sasanka Perera and Professor Ravi Kumar of the Department of Sociology of South Asian University, India, was held yesterday. They were both very successful and productive meetings. The fourth and the last workshop, which is on philosophy for social research, is conducted by Professor Jayadev Uyangada of the University of Colombo from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. on 3rd of May. That is day after tomorrow. So the supreme goal of this workshop series is to facilitate the enhancement of the quality of the research conducted by students, junior and senior lecturers who are commonly referred to as researchers in the fields of humanities and social sciences. At the same time, our conference is taking place on 16th and 17th of March next year. And another goal of this series of workshops is to facilitate the process of quality of abstract writing. So with the training gained through these workshops into writing of abstracts of very high quality, we also expect you to submit abstracts to our conference. We have extended the deadline for abstract submission till end of May this year. And after the workshops, we'll have about a month to reflect on and write a good abstract and submit it to our conference. In general, through the scientific insight into various aspects related to quality research gained through this series of workshops, we wish to create a very productive and effective research culture in our country, which will in turn serve to make the lives of the people here and around the world better. This series of workshops was an idea suggested by Professor Chiranta Heenkenda, the Dean Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences of the University of Sri Jawadhanapura, and it was developed further by Professor Venerable Pindola Sangasumana to put into action. I hope that we'll be able to see the fruits of their visionary thinking in due course. I wish you all a very enjoyable and productive series of workshops. Thank you.
So now I would like to invite Dr. Taranga Veerasuriya again, Conference Chair of the IRCHSS 2023, to invite our resource person, Dr. Patrick Faulkner, for the workshop. Sir, over to you again.
Okay, thank you, Kanishka, again. Now I invite Dr. Patrick Faulkner to begin the workshop. And you can start with an introduction to yourself, Dr. Faulkner, as you requested. Also, this is a notice to the participants of the workshop. The workshop will be conducted in English, and if you have any difficulty understanding anything, Dr. Oshan Vidage, a senior lecturer of the Department of Archaeology of the University of Sri Jawadhanapura, will help you with translations in English or Sinhala. And you can also ask questions in English or Sinhala. So over to you, Dr. Faulkner. Thank you very much.
Okay, so for today, we'll be looking at a little bit, before we get onto that, just to be able to give you a brief introduction to me, I thought it might be a little bit easier for me to just introduce myself rather than sending through curriculum vitae. I'm an Australian archaeologist. I completed my degrees at the Australian National University, BA Honours in 1999, and completed my grad 2007 until 2013. At that point, I have a new position at the university now from 2014 to present. And I'm currently an Australian Research Council Future Fellow. So this is a mid-career research fellowship within the, and this allows me to undertake focused research for 4 years. We've just started that research project going from 2022 through to 2026. And my research covers a broad aspect of archaeology, really focusing on scientific archaeology for the most part. I'm what's referred to as an archaeomalacologist, which means I look at the remains of shell from archaeological deposits. My initial work was in Northern Australia, in Northeast Arnhem Land, and since then I've worked across Australia and in the last 10 years into Eastern Africa, looking at the archaeological record in Kenya, Tanzania and Zanzibar, the Comores and Madagascar. And since 2018, I've been undertaking research in Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka forms the dominant component in terms of the geographic region for the Future Fellowship. The fellowship will be run in collaboration with the University of Sri Jawadhanapura. Okay, so what I thought we'd do to start with is very briefly just give you an overview of the major topics that I thought would be good for us to cover within this workshop. As Professor said at in the introduction, I'm quite happy for people to ask questions, to ask me to explain things again if need be, or as was mentioned, we could ask Dr. Oshan to translate some of the content as we're going. I understand that the Australian accent can be a little bit difficult for people. So if I am speaking too fast, or if something is coming across that isn't quite able to be understood clearly, just let me know and we can make sure that we cover that material clearly. Okay, so for the workshop today, we're really going to deal with particularly how conference abstracts are evaluated by reviewers. And as a part of that, we'll also sort of touch on how journal abstracts are also evaluated. So we'll run through a couple of key points so that when you are preparing your abstract, you can really think about the key components that you need to add into the abstract for maximum impact, so that abstract will be reviewed favorably by the conference reviewers or the journal. To start with, I thought I'd just touch very briefly on structuring academic research and how we do that, because I think that really informs the way we approach not just the material that we prepare for the conference paper or for the journal article or publication, but also how we approach the nature and the structure of the abstract as well. I want to talk a little bit about what the purpose of an abstract is, just so that we're all clear on why we write an abstract, how we write it, and what we need to actually put into that abstract for maximum impact, as I mentioned. And that then moves into really understanding what the key elements of a strong abstract actually are. But the starting point for the preparation of the abstract to a large degree is actually understanding who your audience is going to be. So I want to talk a little bit about how you could start to approach that. And then looking at what abstract reviewers tend to look for within the abstracts that they're assessing. And I thought we might be able to end on just one example, using a set of criteria that you could actually then kind of look at and evaluate and decide while we're online in the workshop whether or not that abstract example does the job, whether it's a strong abstract and will be acceptable for presentation at a conference. Okay, so the starting point here really for us is understanding the research structure in terms of presenting academic research. And this is something that I talk quite a lot about in my own teaching, and I think quite a lot about as well when I'm preparing my own materials for publication or for presentation at conferences. And we can think about the presentation of research as being something like an hourglass shape. Right, so we're starting broad, narrowing down, as you can see on the slide here, and then expanding out again. This kind of structure is really effective for publication. It's really effective for the content of a conference paper, but it's also an essential component, I think, of how you would approach an abstract as well, because these are the key elements realistically that you would like to incorporate not just into the presentation of your research in its long form, but also the presentation of the research within the abstract itself. Okay, remembering that an abstract is effectively a short snippet of what the longer form of that research presentation is actually going to give. So generally, starting with something like an introduction, you really want to start broad, thinking about what the key big picture issues are that the research will address. In doing that, you would want to review the key published literature or available data, okay, as a broad overview more than anything else. And that often provides a rationale for the nature of the research questions as well. In presenting that overview of the literature, you're then able to clearly identify the gaps within our present knowledge. So the body of information that we have available to us now, where are those gaps? What can your research actually fill in terms of the bigger picture issues that are currently playing out in contemporary research within your field? Okay, so we'll try and move on from this rather than rehashing stuff that I think I've already said. Okay, but then expanding out from your evaluation of the information that you have at hand to thinking about the analysis, and then importantly, broadening it to the implications or the significance for your particular research field. Okay, so as an archaeologist, we would approach things in particular ways, particularly within scientific archaeology. But I think this sort of structure works really well irrespective. So regardless of the kind of research or the disciplinary area that you're working within, okay, because it gives a nice flow and a structure to the presentation of the research as well as to the abstract itself. Okay, so hopefully that made sense even with the interruptions. Okay, so as I mentioned, the abstract really needs to be more than just a simple, pure description of what the research is going to be. Okay. What you don't want to do is then go to the other extreme, okay, where you're presenting a detailed review or a detailed evaluation of the particular topic that you will be presenting on. Okay, so you need to be able to meet the middle ground in terms of it being descriptive and informative at the same time. One of the things that particularly early career researchers do, which is a little bit of a trap that people fall into, is that rather than writing the abstract as a separate standalone piece of text, people copy and paste a section of the main text from their presentation or their publication as the abstract. Okay, so that won't actually be a robust abstract in itself. Okay, that won't be a strong abstract because it won't meet the requirements of actually structuring the work. Okay, it just reflects one or two short elements of the longer piece of work. Okay. So in that sense, it's actually often better to really look through the longer piece of work to see what the key critical elements are. Think about things like keywords and write that abstract effectively as a new piece of writing to sit at the very start of the work that you'll be presenting. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so just to reinforce those points just a little bit. Okay, so rather than being just descriptive, okay, or a little bit over the top in terms of presenting too much detailed information, the strongest abstracts are informative and they reflect the nature of the entire body of work that you'll be presenting. Okay, so you're providing an overview of the main arguments and the key results that you are presenting within the complete paper. So this is where I was mentioning really thinking about as you would move through the writing of that longer piece of work, particularly for a conference presentation, is looking for where the keywords are, what are the significant, strongest points that you're making within each of those sections. Okay, so introduction, background, research questions, the nature of the evaluation of the data, and then out to the interpretation of broader significance. And then you can pull those together into the abstract to form what will be a really nice, strong and informative overview of the material that you are proposing to present at the conference itself. Okay, does anybody have any questions on that so far? Just because we had a number of interruptions with the signal dropping out. Is there anything that people would like me to revisit again, or any questions on that material? Nothing? Okay. Okay, so this section really builds on what we've already discussed to a large degree. Okay, so what I'm trying to do within this part of the talk, I guess as part of the workshop, is to think about, again, what those really key elements are for writing and presenting the strongest possible abstract that you can. So again, I think the important thing to take away from this is that there are, I guess, general requirements for an abstract, really regardless of the nature of the research that you do. Okay, so thinking about the components, okay, again, coming back to that hourglass shape for presentation of research. Okay, but what are the key components that you need to provide within the abstract to make it as strong as possible? Okay, so generally, when you see people talking about how you put an abstract together, okay, there are, for the most part, 5 main elements that you want to include within the abstract. Okay, so the first one, which is really important, is presenting the reason for why you're writing the abstract and writing the conference paper or the publication. Okay, so what is the research? Why is that important? We often do research for a number of different reasons. Obviously, we're all interested in our own disciplinary areas, and there are particular questions that we're interested in addressing. But how do we then embed our own interests into the broader significance or importance of the research that we're undertaking for our field? Okay, in doing that as well, particularly with a conference paper, think about why the reader, say for a publication, or the person who would be attending the presentation at the conference, why would they be interested in your work and how that connects to the larger piece of research? Okay, so as an example, probably the easiest way for me to do this is to provide an example of my own work. Okay, and the work that we've just initiated here in Sri Lanka. Okay, so what I'm interested in is how people interact with the environments in which they live. And the way I do that is to look at the remains of marine, terrestrial, and freshwater mollusks or shellfish. Okay, so that then kind of narrows into a very, very specific area of interest to some degree. Right, so that engagement with the environment allows it to then broaden out to a large degree. Within a region like Sri Lanka, the broader rationale or significance for this research is the fact that Sri Lanka is located centrally between Africa and Southeast Asia and Australasia. Okay, so if we can actually start to understand from the full sequence, the full time period of human occupation in Sri Lanka, how people lived within the environment, how they adapted to potentially changing environments within this particular location, we can then start to address broader issues of human dispersals out of Africa through South Asia and then across to Southeast Asia and Australasia, where the amount of research that's been done, particularly of greater antiquity, is minimal. So that then allows us to address issues of human movement and human adaptation to a much greater degree. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully that addresses that question. If not, let me know and I'll come back to that thinking about a different example. Okay, so once you've outlined the nature of the broader body of work, okay, you can then really start to embed your research questions and your work into the specific questions or problems that your project has been set up to solve or to answer. Okay, in doing that too, you want to be able to set the scope of the project. Okay, all projects have limitations, so you can be really clear. Okay, you might have a broad overarching question, okay, but where are the limits to how you can address that question? What are the specifics of the information or data that you've collected? Whether you're doing something like a literature review or you're doing empirical first-hand data collection, okay, how do those data connect to the scope of the project, as well as the nature of the questions that are being asked? All right. Once you've set that up within the abstract, okay, you can then outline the major arguments that you're going to present as well. There are two ways that you can do that. You can either outline the major argument prior to really talking about the specifics of the information that you're going to present, so within the abstract, or you can add in that sort of main argument after you say, you know, these are the data sets that are being evaluated. This is the literature that's being evaluated, for example. Okay, and then you can flow into presenting the main argument from there. Okay, things like methodology can be obviously very variable in terms of the nature of the work that we do. Okay, so even within archaeology, and I'm mindful that this is a multidisciplinary audience as well, but obviously it's easier for me to fall back a little bit in terms of examples on my own discipline. Within archaeology, the kinds of methods, the nature of the approaches that we use varies depending on the questions that we're asking and the kind of research that we're interested in addressing. Okay, so if we're undertaking more scientifically oriented research, then our discussion of methods will often be more formal. Okay, if we're doing more qualitative rather than quantitative research, how we present those methods will be structured differently. Okay, so you actually need to present that kind of information relative to the disciplinary requirements in terms of your own fields of study and research, and potentially also sub-disciplinary requirements. Okay, so really depending on the kind of research that you're doing, the overview or outline of the methods that you present in the abstract would be noting, say, specific models that will be developed or tested, the kinds of approaches in general terms that you would be using, and also the kind of evidence that you would be presenting within the conference paper as well. Okay, and a statement of the results in the abstract is useful as well. Excuse me. All right, and excuse me. The same kind of approach to the methodology really applies here as well. All right, it depends entirely on the kind of disciplinary and sub-disciplinary research that you're doing. Okay, so the kind of research that you're undertaking informs the way you present the results, whether they're, again, quantitative or qualitative. All right, so you might, in the abstract, include specific reference to certain kinds of data that are critical to the development of particular models or that feed into an understanding of particular questions and therefore interpretations. Or within the abstract, you might note the results in a more general way. All right, so in that sense, it also relates to the specifics of the research question. All right, and as a part of presenting our research in a longer form, whether that's written publication or whether it's conference presentation, okay, the nature of our questions inform our research, they inform the methods that we are implementing, and also inform the kinds of results that we have. Okay, so that's where this becomes quite important to really sort of think about the context in which you're undertaking the research itself. And really importantly, and I've seen this quite often with particularly conference abstracts, is that the abstract gets to the point where it talks about the results briefly, and then the abstract will stop. What you need to do to really maximize the effectiveness of the app for this kind of material is talk about the implications of the research. Right? So specifically mention at the end of the abstract, okay, what does the research that you've undertaken add? What are the significant issues, the big gaps within the broader literature that you've identified previously? Okay, what are you adding to that body of knowledge, and why is that important? And I think these statements of implications or significance right at the end of the abstract often really add just that additional strength to what you're going to present, how you present that information within the abstract itself, and how people will assess or evaluate the abstract as a separate piece of writing. Okay, any questions on or further questions on that so far? Anything that wasn't clear that you might like me to go over again? All good? Okay, so I thought I would just put this slide in as an example. So this is from a journal article. This was a paper that I wrote and published in 2019 in the Journal of Ethnobiology. Okay, so that journal is multidisciplinary. So it's not just thinking about archaeology, but anthropology, ethnoarchaeology, and ethnobiology. So we had been undertaking research in the Mafia archipelago off the southern coast of Tanzania. And part of that work, I had identified certain gaps within the broader archaeological literature, but had also been thinking about how that research connected to broader global implications for the kind of work that we do as archaeologists. Okay, so how can we use our research to think about things like conservation management? So not just heritage management, but conservation management and ecosystem management. So along the east coast of Africa, there are a number of different marine protected areas, and there's quite a large one within the Mafia archipelago. So what I wanted to do was to write a paper that considered the potential implications for archaeological evidence over the long term, how that relates to the way people are using sort of near shore environments in the ocean, as well as coral reefs, okay, and the oceans or marine areas sort of closer to the islands themselves, areas that are being heavily impacted by modern day fisheries. Right. So this tapped into significant current discussions within my discipline, as well as kind of associated disciplines around the world, thinking about elements of historical ecology for the intertidal resources. Okay. And I wanted to use this one because it's an example that I'm particularly proud of myself in terms of the kind of work that we did. Excuse me. Okay, but the abstract, you can see how I think, or I hope, this abstract addresses those 5 key criteria for the development of a strong abstract. Okay, so starting broad, again, remembering that hourglass type shape. So the first sentence gives us this big picture statement in terms of what research on coast and islands, where we sort of stand in terms of one of the core or central issues that archaeologists are thinking about these days. Okay, so that's what that first sentence attempts to do. Okay, is provide a big picture statement. Okay, it then starts to narrow down slightly by presenting information on the situation that we see within coast and islands off the Eastern African sort of continent. Okay, we know that people have occupied these areas, okay, but in thinking about the particular issue raised in the first sentence, up till now, we don't see those areas kind of figuring as key locations within these discussions. Okay, and why that's important is because within Africa, as we see within a lot of parts of the world, we've got significant environmental changes that have occurred over the last 10,000 plus years, but significant environmental changes that are occurring because of human activity. In combination with that, we've got really important sort of social changes and political changes occurring, particularly over the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. In combination, these things are a massive threat to marine ecosystems. Okay, so that then sort of sets the scene for what has been done and why that is a major gap in what we know. Okay. The next sentence, starting with "here we begin developing," okay, highlights the particular issue in terms of marine resource use within the specific study area of the Mafia Archipelago and the Mafia Island Marine Park. I then narrowed down again to say, what data are we looking at? Okay, so it's the marine invertebrates here that form the key data set that we're bringing together to address these particular kinds of issues. All right, so that sort of flags not necessarily the specifics of the methods. Okay, so I felt that wasn't particularly appropriate for this journal to go into a lot of detail in terms of the specific methods, okay, and a lot of detail of the data itself, other than to say that it was going to be marine invertebrates. Okay, so in this example, I've just provided a general statement for the body of evidence that will be evaluated. Right, and then I start to broaden again. Okay, so what have we found? Well, it looks like things were pretty complex in terms of the way people interacted with their environment for about 2,000 years, but we don't have all the answers. Okay, so we can address certain elements of the research problem, okay, but there are still big gaps remaining that need to be addressed. But what that actually means is that we've got a foundation or a starting point for thinking about these core issues flagged at the start of the abstract, okay, right, which then at the end of the abstract provides a statement of significance or replication. Does that make sense to everyone in terms of this as an example of highlighting those 5 important elements of a successful abstract? Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to throw those into the chat if you do.
Yes, so please ask questions if you can, or you can type them in the chat box. And we would like it to be like more interactive.
You go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so I think this section might be where we can probably get sort of a few more comments and questions from people. Okay, just seeing one in the chat. Oh, okay. Oh no, someone's just said they can't unmute. That's okay. If you can't unmute, if you can put a question into the chat, then I'll come back to it, and that's okay.
So we can actually like look into it, and it will be okay in 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no worries. All right, so I think hopefully all of that makes sense in terms of just really outlining the essential components of an abstract and what it does. All right, and that's important. I know you've just gone through an abstract writing workshop, but those elements are really important when you're thinking about the assessors, the reviewers of the abstract, and what they're thinking about, what they're reviewing in terms of the specific inclusions of your abstract to see if that's going to be appropriate for incorporation into the conference. Okay, so this is where you need to start thinking about the starting point for the abstract that you're going to be presenting. It's really important to do some research on the conference. Okay, so look at any information that okay. Right, so I think this is the key thing. Is really understanding from that, you can then start to work out how your research fits. You can make an argument for why it would be important to incorporate that research into the conference through the abstract. All right, so identifying specific themes, whether they're for the overall conference, okay, or whether they relate to sessions within the conference itself that will have usually information associated with it in terms of the range of perspectives that they want to see incorporated into the conference. Okay. All right, so the themes, perspectives, often people will also talk about certain kinds of approaches that they want to have discussed. Okay, so in that sense too, you need to really think about whether your research fits those kinds of descriptions. Once you've identified the important themes, the perspectives, and possibly the kinds of approaches to research that the conference itself or sessions within the conference will want to be discussing, you can use that information to structure the abstract. You use that information to think about how you pitch the research that you have undertaken to suit the nature of that conference. All right, so again, this is where it's important, because if there are abstract reviewers for the conference, and this can work very differently depending on the nature of the conference itself within my experience. There can either be a central review committee for the entire conference, or the session conveners will review the abstracts and accept or reject. Okay, either way, regardless of how the abstracts will be reviewed, you've got a much stronger chance of having your paper accepted for a conference if the abstract that you submit clearly demonstrates how it fits the conference theme, or it addresses a number, at least one, if not more, of the key issues that the conference will aim to explore. If you submit an abstract for a conference and you can't make an argument that your research is appropriate for the scope of that conference, that will come through in the abstract. Okay, the reviewers will see that this is probably not going to be an appropriate paper for acceptance within the conference, or acceptance within any of the sessions that are being offered within that conference as well. So knowing your audience and really structuring the information in your abstract and pitching it to suit those requirements, I think is probably a really, really important step in ensuring that your paper will be accepted for presentation. Okay, as an example of how this can work. Right, so IRCHSS is the International Council for Archaeology, and this conference will be run in Australia next year. Right, so this conference has one major theme, okay, and this is the description of the major theme that you can see on the left-hand side here. All right, so this theme is basically looking at oceans and coasts and how the multidisciplinary work, okay, that we do within archaeology and associated disciplines can address issues of the human past, thinking about where we are now in terms of our engagement with marine ecosystems and ecosystem management into the future. Okay, so this is the major theme for the conference. But in addition to that, because this is in some ways relatively restrictive, okay, in terms of broader disciplinary research. Okay, so to add depth and breadth to this, okay, there are 4 sub-themes that have been developed. And I haven't put the description information for the sub-themes in here, okay, but each of these 4 can connect to the major conference theme, okay, or like the one down the bottom here, coastal and marine connections, or it can be standalone to give that breadth and ability for researchers to incorporate their work into this international conference. All right, so for a conference like this, you would review the major theme, okay, and abstract information, okay, or description or discussion for the major theme. Work out whether your research would fit the specifics of the major theme. If it doesn't, you would then go to the sub-theme descriptions. And from there, look at how you might be able to pitch your work as it relates to one of these 4 sub-themes. Then have a look at the session descriptions. Okay. So again, you're sort of starting broad in terms of what the conference is aiming to do. Okay. Thinking about how your research relates to that. If not, coming down to sub-themes. Once you've worked out where the research fits within these sub-thematic areas, how it may fit within individual sessions under those themes. Now, this conference has a central scientific committee. That committee evaluates all session abstracts and all paper abstracts for those sessions. So this is where you would need to look at really flagging and highlighting the connection of the committee, okay, reviews your work favorably. They look at the kind of research that you're presenting, its connection to bigger picture research themes, okay, that identification of the research problem and the knowledge gap, okay, through to that broad statement of significance and implications for the discipline. Doing that relative to these themes and sub-themes would ensure that your paper would be far more likely to be accepted into a conference of this type. Okay, sorry, I'll go back one. Does that sort of make sense to everybody? Has anybody got other sort of experiences that they've had in terms of conferences or symposia that might work in slightly similar or different ways that they might want to raise? Oh, right. Okay, so hopefully that sort of short discussion gives you an idea about where to start in terms of putting together the abstract and how to pitch it. Now, conference abstract reviewers will look for a whole range of different things normally. Some conferences will publish their assessment criteria for abstracts, and that will be available on conference websites, so you can do your research on that as well. Others don't. But whether you're given very specific information or you're given very little information in terms of the review process, if you're looking at sort of that research on and addressing those kinds of issues, and then thinking about these 5 points that I've put on the slide here. Okay, I think regardless of the way in which abstract reviewers at conferences work, whether they're dealing with very specific detailed criteria or not, these are the 5 broad headings, okay, that abstract reviewers will basically be working within in their assessment of the abstract. And the first one is going to be relevance to the conference. Right, so again, that's emphasizing on the conference themes and how you can pitch your research to address those. Excuse me. All right, within your abstract, the reviewers will really be looking for very clear, specific statements of the aims and objectives or the research problem. So be very clear. Okay, what is the gap? How will the gap be addressed? Right. Probably the best advice that I could give in terms of clarity of presentation of this kind of information is not to try and make the text too complicated or too complex. Okay, if it's clear and it's concise, okay, or simple, so short and simple, and you're able to get that critical message across in terms of particularly the aims and objectives and the relevance to the conference. Okay, then you'll have done a fantastic. Okay, this will, the third point, appropriateness of the research, the study or the methodology. Okay, this will depend to some degree on your discipline, on your research area, on the kinds of questions that are being asked within your research, and how your work will fit within a conference theme, a sub-theme, or a session proposal as well. All right, it's effectively making sure also that there's a clear and simple statement of how you've undertaken the research. And I think that then speaks to how you've engaged with contemporary research practice within your field. All right, and you want to make sure that within the abstract, okay, that you flag not necessarily a large discussion, but flag in a way that presents aspects of the conclusion or interpretation. You've got to remember that abstract reviewers will potentially be reviewing tens, if not more, depending on the size of the conference. They could be reviewing up to about 100 abstracts. So it's important for you to make sure that you write the abstract in a way that the reviewer can read it and immediately understand the nature of the research and why it's important. Okay, so clarity of language can be really key for the assessment process. Okay, because you're pitching it to a group of people who are reviewing a lot of abstracts. Okay, does that all make sense so far? Any questions? Any comments from anyone?
Yes, Dr. Faulkner, it's a good idea if we can actually post the criteria or guidelines for the authors when we call for abstracts. Actually, we didn't do that, but in future,
I think it's really useful. I've presented at a lot of conferences over the years where the criteria haven't been published.
Yeah.
So you've got to work just that little bit harder to think about the nature of the material that the reviewers will be looking for. And in the slides, I've given 2 web links because conferences and reviewers will operate in different ways. And sometimes those reviews can be They can be qualitative. So it can be based on sort of just descriptive criteria, or the reviewers will actually assign a score to the abstract. And then that score determines whether or not your abstract is accepted or not. So I think either way, it can be useful for people to really know, what the conference is looking for and what the reviewers are looking for, and make sure that their work really can be pitched at an appropriately high level for acceptance.
Yes, yeah. Actually, we had that idea in our mind, like when we started doing this, somehow, on the way, that idea got lost. And we admit that we are a little late to do it now, because we had one deadline like that was over on the 30th of April. We have extended the deadline, but if we post the criteria now, it will be unfair by the authors who have already submitted.
Yeah.
We implement like for the future conferences. And also, audience, this is something, this is kind of a general set of guidelines or criteria. And then so those who are here, they can follow the criteria here when they are, if you haven't submitted your abstract yet.
Yeah, I might just move on. Okay, so I think this this next couple of slides could be useful. I came across this example last week, doing a little bit of additional sort of research for this workshop. And I thought the reviewing guidelines that were published for this conference were really useful because they're not quantitative, they're qualitative. And they're phrased in a way that I think allows the conference organisers and the reviewers to have a little bit of leeway relative to the sort of themes or sessions, or disciplinary discussions that will go on within the conference as well. So I'll just show those here. I've copied the criteria here. So this is actually quite simple. Okay, so excuse me, whether or not for the conference next year, you wanted to develop something that's sort of quite simple and descriptive as criteria like this. As you say, that might be unfair for people who have already submitted their abstracts. But for sort of further development, something like this, I think, gives you a bit of room to move when you've got a multidisciplinary conference. So here, like I say, 5 at the top of this scale. Excellent, clarity of the abstract, concise and really well written. I think it would depend on how the sessions are organised within the conference, and the conference abstract reviewers may be working outside of their disciplinary area, or they may be allocated abstracts to review just within their own disciplinary expertise. But thinking about the relevance of the research, okay, how it connects to current research that's being undertaken globally, and research that would be thought-provoking for the audience, to then kind of generate more discussion within the conference itself. Okay, and when you put those things together, okay, then the assessment would be that yes, the abstract would be accepted. All right, and then for within this scale, okay, for an assessment of good, okay, same kind of statement at the start. Abstract is clear, concise, and well written. Okay, it's relevant, thought-provoking, and timely. Okay, abstract is considered worthy of presentation. It's pretty much similar, or exactly the same, basically, almost exactly the same. Right, so in that sense, I think particularly whether you've got early career researchers submitting abstracts as well, you don't want to set your cutoff for acceptance of abstracts at only the excellent level, because I think you need to help early career researchers, postgraduate students, an opportunity to develop these kinds of skills as well. So then allowing another kind of set of evaluations, so excellent and good, okay, and then down to average. Okay, and this may be where you would have some discussion as a review committee, okay, about whether or not that abstract would be considered for acceptance within the conference for presentation. There may be issues in terms of the way the abstract was written. It may lack some clarity or conciseness in the presentation of that information. It could be really good research, but it may not be as stimulating for the audience. So in this sense, you might consider this abstract for incorporation as a reviewer, but you may sort of allocate this to one for further consideration and discussion, depending on, I think, just how many abstracts you get submitted that fall within the excellent or good category. So what you really want to do when you're writing the abstract is sort of pitch it into these sort of upper descriptive criteria. Okay, incorporating those elements that we discussed in the previous slides. And as a reviewer, these are the things that you would be looking for in a very basic sense, relative to the aims of the conference. And then if the abstract starts to become a little vague, it may be presenting research that may not really kind of suit the entirety of the audience that you're pitching the conference to. Then you may allocate those as average. They might be included into the conference if they're kind of at the upper end of average, or they may be excluded depending on sort of space within sessions or within a schedule overall. Okay, and then the last two, okay, poor or borderline acceptable, and then very poor, particularly where it lacks clarity. The reader has difficulty comprehending the nature of the research that is being proposed to be presented. It's difficult to follow. You don't get a really good indication of how and why that research might be important or significant. Or it may be unoriginal. It may be replicating work that's already been done. In that sense, you may relegate those abstracts to a category of exclusion. Okay. It depends on if the conference is set up to provide people who are submitting abstracts with an opportunity to revise, which some do, quite a lot don't. There may be too many critical issues in a very poor abstract to be able to accept that for presentation. Okay, poor or borderline. Borderline, I would probably more bring into the lower end of the average descriptive category. Okay, so largely well written, problems with clarity and presentation, issues with the questions in terms of relevance or originality. Could be worth presentation, depending on whether or not revisions can be accepted to the abstracts. But it may be a case where these would fall into the exclusion category rather than inclusion as a result. Okay, does that sort of set of 5 criteria, is that kind of useful to be thinking about in terms of how you might write your own abstract, but then also the potential for reviewing abstracts for acceptance at a conference as well. Is that useful, do you think?
Yes, yeah. So it will be really useful.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I've just mentioned, not all conferences will really outline the abstract review process or the kind of criteria that they use for review. A lot of the major international conferences that I've presented at don't provide clarity on the review process. So in those kinds of situations, you're really falling back on your own research in terms of the nature of the conference and the themes and the sessions, and trying to pitch the information in the abstract clearly, concisely, to cover all of those key elements that we've talked about within this workshop so far, to give yourself the best chance of having the paper accepted. I believe these slides will be distributed. So there's 2 links to other review guidelines. One on language development, okay, one here that's a sort of international scientific conference. These are kind of useful to compare with the qualitative descriptive criteria that we just had a quick look through, because these examples work through the review process slightly differently. I don't think necessarily better in terms of clarity of the abstract review criteria, but just in a different way. And I think when you break these down, particularly where this last one is assigning scores relative to criteria in the review process, those criteria conform largely to those 5 broad criteria that we talked about a little bit earlier anyway. Okay. So I think there are different ways to set the review criteria up to help the people who are submitting, but also to allow the reviewers an opportunity to kind of look a little bit more favorably at the material that's being submitted. Okay, so for the last 10 minutes, I think the bulk of the workshop or discussion was set to be completed at about 3:30. I thought it might be useful for everyone to have a look at an example relative to the review criteria that we just talked through. Okay, so again, I've used an archaeological example here, but I think just in terms of looking at the key elements of an abstract and how that fits together, it probably doesn't really matter that it's archaeology as opposed to any other discipline. So I thought it could be useful to look at an abstract that was submitted to a Society of Africanist Archaeologists conference that was initially scheduled to run in 2020. Okay, there was no overarching conference theme, okay, but the session theme looked at economic transitions and environmental archaeology, so very much kind of on the scientific spectrum of the discipline. Okay, the keywords for the session, okay, archaeozoology, geoarchaeology, archaeobotany, isotopes, and environment. Okay, so really sort of narrowing down into looking at fauna, botanical material, soils and sediments, and some of the scientific analyses of those kinds of subdisciplinary areas. So I thought it might be interesting if everyone had a look at the session abstract. There was one document that I sent through to be distributed to the participants that had the session abstract, the abstract of the paper, and the 5 qualitative review criteria. So I thought I might give everybody here maybe about 5 minutes to have a read through that material. And then we can kind of come back and have a look at it. And if anybody has any questions or comments, you know, if people kind of look at that abstract example and decide, you know, where within the criteria that might actually kind of fit. Okay, so yep, that has been sent through by email. Okay, so what I might do is just mute myself, turn the camera off for 5 minutes. Okay, and then I'll come back just to give you a chance to have a read through that material. And then if anybody has questions, comments, or assessments, we could talk through that then. Okay.
If they don't have any questions, you can continue, Dr. Faulkner.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir, may I?
Yeah, you can ask questions. Yeah.
Yes, as pointed out by you in the demonstration, you said that the abstract is a concise, informative work of study. Could you please tell us about the word count, sir? Length of the word count that we should include in the abstract. Something about the. Sir, am I audible to you?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I missed part of the question.
Yes, sir. You said that the abstract is an informative, concise document. So I want to know about the length of the document, sir, the word limit. So how many word count?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really depends on the conference. Okay, so each individual conference will set a word limit for the abstracts. Okay, some will be up to about 500 words. Some will be about 350. Okay, so conferences will usually give you an indication in terms of the requirements for abstract submission. Okay, so they'll give you word count and submission process. So that's also part of the, I think, the research element for looking at the individual conferences themselves, what the actual requirements are for the abstract, and making sure that you keep to those very, very carefully in terms of the word limit. With some conferences, if you go beyond the word count limit, that will be an automatic exclusion of the abstract. Right. So with this example that I sent through for the Africanist Archaeologist Conference, the word limit for that abstract was 500 words. So that gives you a little bit more room to play with. If it's lower than that, if it's about 300 or 350, okay, then you've got to be even more clear, even more careful in terms of how you phrase the information and get that key info across within the abstract. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Inoka, and also thank you very much, Dr. Faulkner, for the explanation. Our conference, actually, we didn't specify a word limit. We have specified the page limit and the margins and the letter size, font size, and also the spaces. So we expected that when we didn't want to specify a word limit, but as long as your abstract is kind of written within those limits. Okay, so for our conference, the word limit doesn't matter as long as you give us an abstract of 2 pages within the other limits that we have specified.
Okay, so for your conference, it's up to 2 pages?
Yeah, up to 2 pages.
Okay, that actually that gives a lot of scope for as a presenter to really make sure that in writing the abstract that you are able to clearly demonstrate, you know, significance and importance of the research to be presented at the conference. In my experience with conferences in Australia, in America, in Europe, it's a much tighter sort of limit to the abstract, which has its challenges. Because if you are trying to get that information across to the reviewers, how you phrase that material can be quite difficult in structuring the abstract. So with a 2-page sort of structure, that gives you good scope as a presenter or potential presenter. As a reviewer, it also allows you to really kind of look in depth at the information that's being presented. So you would still be looking for the same criteria, same features of the abstract within 2 pages. Just expect those to be expanded on a little bit, how the data or the information has been addressed, and then the significance. I think that's not a bad approach, to be honest. If so, does anyone have any comments on that example relative to those sort of 5-point qualitative criteria? Okay, so based on what we talked about, would you accept it as an abstract for a conference presentation? Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you now. Did you actually ask a question?
Okay, so yeah, from looking at that example relative to those criteria, does anyone want to maybe sort of start a discussion on that, or maybe sort of indicate whether relative to those 5 criteria they'll accept that abstract for a presentation at a conference?
So the last part was not clear, Dr. Faulkner. Can you repeat that, please?
Oh, sorry, must have dropped out a little bit. I was just wondering if anyone would like to maybe sort of note, in comparison with those 5 assessment criteria, whether they feel that example abstract should or shouldn't be accepted for a conference presentation.
The audience can answer the question, right?
Yeah. Don't be shy.
Yeah. And yes, yeah, you can continue. Yeah, if there's no.
Okay. All right. So basically that was going to be the end of it. I was hoping that might generate a little bit more discussion, but that's okay. I think I will tell you though that abstract was accepted. So when I wrote that, basically I wrote that abstract having looked at the session information, and then keeping all of those key points for the abstract in mind. So every time I write an abstract for a conference or for a journal article, I'm thinking about those key elements that we've discussed in the workshop today, so that I can present the research. Okay, I am pretty much finished. I think so. Yep. Okay, so I sort of organised this, I think, under the schedule to complete at about past. Does anyone need anything? I think there was time for any sort of translation from English into Sinhalese, if need be. If anyone wants that, can you let us know? Okay, if there are no questions or comments, thank you all for your time this afternoon. Thank you all again for inviting me to participate in the workshop. I really hope that was useful. I hope that you'll be able to sort of take some of that information away and sort of incorporate into your own work or into review work for the conference. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this. So thank you all very much.
Okay, so do you still have any questions? And do you want anything explained in Sinhala?
Okay, I'll stop sharing for you now. I think there was one question.
Yeah.
Depending on the nature of the research, might include specific approaches, models, or types of evidence used in the study. Can you briefly tell us about evidence used in the study in related to abstract? Okay, so do you mean in terms of the example abstract that I gave you? Yep. Okay, so in that abstract, I kept it fairly general as well. Okay, so what I wanted to flag within that abstract was the broader significance of the site and the bigger picture issues that research was going to address. Okay, so it was really just mentioning that, again, the primary focus for the work to be presented was going to be based on the invertebrate material. Okay, so acknowledging that other work had been done on that particular site and why it was significant, where the gap was in terms of the kinds of analyses that conference paper was going to address, and then from there jumping out. So you need to, I think, evaluate how much detail you want to go into in terms of the approach, models, and types of evidence. In this case, and in the publication example that I showed earlier, I kept the nature of that information very general, because I wanted to really highlight the big picture. Okay, so mentioning the focal points for the analyses, but really trying to emphasize that, you know, there are big issues here that can be addressed. Okay, these are the issues, and then how we're actually going to kind of think about the significance and the implications of that. There's been other conference abstracts that I've written where I've gone into a lot more detail in terms of the nature of the methods. So in that sense, I'm talking about very specific analytical methods that I've used, because that suits the nature of the session and that suited the nature of the questions that were being asked. Okay, so you need to look at the balance there in terms of where you emphasize the detail within the abstract. I hope that answers the question. I'm also quite happy if the organisers if there are any questions from the workshop organisers. I'm quite happy to answer questions by email as well. If people have questions they can't.
So there's a
Question.
participant who raised her hand. Ravini, you can ask your question.
Ravini, please ask your question. Your microphone is muted and you can unmute and ask. Or you cannot unmute yourself. So, Kanishka?
I think now it's good. Am I audible? Hello, am I audible?
Send your question in the chat box. You cannot.
Ravini, you are good to go.
Yeah. Dr.
If you like two devices, one.
No, I don't have
Who else is like, okay?
took off my headset now. Am I audible now?
Yeah,
That's clearer.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. Anyway, Dr. Faulkner, this is not a question actually. This is how I felt after your session. As far as, I mean, I'm a student who is following a master's degree right now, so I don't have much experience in research field. So therefore, you may correct me if I'm wrong. Right now, what I have seen as abstracts, except yours, the abstracts are almost like the summaries of the researchers. I mean, I think I explained that correctly. Like, it's not an abstract because the examples I have seen is like they first introduce the background, it's okay. Then they tell the exact method that they use to collect data and how they analyze and all. And then they come to findings, and there they specifically point out this one, and list out them. And then they come into a discussion and then finally a conclusion. So that is how I have seen as abstracts. And here the examples that you have given is a little bit different, but I feel like that is more, I mean, there are no specific data, or I mean, there's no specific data in it. So which one is the correct one? Did you get my point?
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying. I don't think neither are actually doing it the wrong way. It will depend it'll depend on the journal. It will depend on the conference. It'll depend on the research questions that you're asking and the kind of work that you're doing. There's a lot of things in that the way you structure the abstract in a broad sense will depend upon. But what you've also just described is the same as what I've described in terms of the key elements of an abstract. Okay, so it sounds like what you're describing may be a little bit more descriptive, whereas what I would sort of tend to say is a little bit more effective would be description and informative. So descriptive and but in a lot of ways, what you just described in terms of what you're seeing in the abstracts that you've read are still, in a general sense, covering those same points. Okay, broad literature, research question, nature of the analyses, interpretation, significance. Okay, so still following that same structure and still incorporating a lot of the really key critical elements for an abstract that we've already talked about today. I don't really see them as being significantly different in a lot of ways.
Okay, so that means we don't have to specifically mention the numerics and like 70% people said this and 30% said this, and like those facts. I mean, yeah, facts.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I don't personally. I think a description of the general trends, rather than really kind of narrowing down into a presentation in the abstract of the specifics of the data. I think that will distract from the message that you're trying to get across within the abstract itself. Okay, so rather than noting what the, say the proportional differences are between respondents to a survey, it's like, well, the general trends in the survey responses are this, and this then leads to an interpretation of, whatever the interpretation is. In mathematics, in some of the sciences, if you're reading those kinds of abstracts, you will see more hard data being incorporated into the abstracts. But in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, I think in terms of the kinds of issues that we're often trying to get across, I think it takes away from the message that we're presenting in the abstract myself.
So one more thing to add. So can we add literature references as well in the discussion?
In the abstract, usually no. You could, if it's a really, really important piece of work that is kind of the foundation for the development of the study, I would incorporate the a reference to that, or a limited number of other studies that are sort of key in terms of informative pieces of work for the development of the research. In general terms, abstracts don't really contain referencing. Okay, so you'll see this with journal articles. It's either no referencing or minimal referencing, and I think the same would often apply to conferences, at least in terms of a lot of the conferences that I've been involved in. I think
in some, sorry, sir. In some abstract, what I have went through, sir, that they have mentioned literature, sir, references. I have seen that, sir.
Well, as I said, it depends on the journal and the conference. I would say keep it to a minimum and just keep it to the key pieces of literature and published literature that informs the work.
Thank you, Dr. Faulkner, for explaining, because we have been referring to other works, and with that exposure only, we raised that question. So we were not criticizing yours. So
no. So,
Yes,
no. I didn't take that as a criticism. I was just kind of expressing my point of view. So.
Yeah. Okay. And thank you very much for explaining. Okay.
No worries.
So one comment.
I have one question.
Okay, yeah, ask please.
I would like to ask, as we are conducted this workshop based on the reviewing process, I have one concern. Sometime when we are submitting our research papers and abstracts to conferences or journals, we have two reviewers, blind reviewers. Sometimes one reviewer accept our paper, saying that it's a very good paper and like that. And sometimes the same paper is rejected by many comments by another reviewer. So what we are going to do at that type of incidences?
It's a really good question, and it's a difficult situation.
Yes, very difficult.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, if it's submission of a, say, journal article, at least then you've got the opportunity to submit a rebuttal to the reviewers. In my experience, you don't with an abstract. So are you talking about the paper itself or the abstract?
Yes, it's a full paper.
The whole paper. Okay, so yes, the rebuttal process is a bit of an art form. So often the best way to handle, especially where you're getting conflicting reviews, is not to kind of play the two reviewers off against each other,
yes,
but more to sort of acknowledge the positive reviews from that one reviewer, and then try and really kind of break down where the key points are, the key criticisms for the rejection from the other reviewer. When you do that, you can actually present a counter argument. Okay, so if you feel that within your paper you have actually presented enough detail, enough information, and enough justification within the submission, you can make that point, and you can make that point with further justification from the published literature. So you can say, in our paper, in our submission, we have done, say this, and this, whatever those key points are. This is in line with other research published by, and then you can cite those authors. If those citations aren't in your paper, you can say these have now been included into the submission. Okay, so you can present a counter argument if you think you've got good justification to argue against those critical points, or you can accept that critique and you can modify the paper enough to cover the points raised by that reviewer. Usually, because if you get one good review, one poor review, the editor will give you a chance for resubmission because you've got one good and one poor. So you can then counter argue in addition to really kind of boosting the strength of your paper relative to those points that the critical reviewer has added into their assessment. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. I have submitted my article to the Frontier Medical Sociology. So one received good comments and other very many comments, not very bad. But finally, the editor decided to ask us to resubmit. So we have now, we have to write all the comments and all the things, answers, and it is like writing the paper again when we are resubmitting.
Yeah. Look,
yeah. Now they are going to appoint new reviewers and start reviewing for it again. So it gains much time and all the effect after completing the full paper and the time that we have spent. What happened with that? That's the thing that I am facing at present. Thank you very much for
no worries, you're
reply.
welcome. I've had very similar experiences. Like I've published, 50 papers, book chapters, and a book in my career, and I've had that experience quite a lot. For me, it's actually been quite rare that I've had 2 or 3 reviewers all come back and say publish as is. Or, I've had 3 reviewers come back and say publish with minor comments, but the majority of the time I find that I have something similar. I've got 1 or 2 really, really positive reviews and another reviewer that just didn't like the work that was presented and what they want changed. And you can actually argue against that. If you don't think those comments are appropriate for the scope of the research that you're presenting, that if what they're asking you to do is to write a paper that they would write rather than the paper that you've written,
yes,
then you can counter, you can make an argument against that and say, these are good points. You sort of be polite, you acknowledge the points, say these are good points, but they don't fit within the scope of this submission for these reasons. And in that way, you're appealing to the editor, unless the editor has actually said you need to address all these points and change the paper, then yeah, you kind of have to.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Anything?
Yeah.
Or are we out of time?
Yeah, we have about 5-6 minutes. And also one comment, many of the questions that the audience asked, maybe there's a difference between an abstract to a conference and also that short abstract that you write in a paper. And maybe for some of them, it wasn't very clear, which abstract they were talking about, referring to. When it comes to references, for abstract of a journal paper, full paper, you don't include, for example, many references. Some journals ask not to include any references in the paper abstract, like abstract of the full paper.
Yeah.
When it comes to conference, mostly, even our own conference, we have asked for references, and also we have asked for a list of references if there is any, maximum 5.
Okay. Yeah, I think I mean, that's a really good point. And it's not been the experience that I've had. Yeah. So I've largely been sort of talking to the experiences I've had in the conferences that I present at. So that is good to know in terms of the information that you've asked for the abstract for this conference. most of the time, like I said, I mean, the conference abstracts that I've written have been short, maximum of 500 words. So in that way, it sort of does relate to my answer to that question earlier, is that you minimize the number of references. If you're going to include references, it's just really for the key literature. It sounds like with this conference, with a 2-page abstract and a requirement for submission of references, that gives much more scope. Okay. So again, I think it really comes down to knowing the requirements of the individual conference and what the conference organisers are looking for with the abstract submission. In the slides, I showed an earlier example from the Journal of Ethnobiology. That was a journal article. The last example for the Society of African Archaeologists was a conference abstract. Personally, my approach to journal articles and conference abstracts is very similar. Okay, so looking at what the conferences require, and modifying to suit the requirements in terms of word limit, formatting and that kind of thing. But for me, at least, I tend to approach the writing of article abstracts and conference abstracts in a very, very similar way, but it's not always going to be appropriate.
Okay, so when you say references, so like they are not citations, or like so are you talking about citations or references, reference list?
Oh, both.
Yeah, for example, to write an abstract like without citations, like especially for example, when you're writing an abstract, so if it is a paper abstract, that's okay, because you have all the citations and reference list that is coming up right later. But when you write a conference abstract to a conference, and you need to base your arguments like in some kind of background literature, background theory, and then you need to give citations like. So this is not a criticism.
Oh, no.
That is what I wanted to ask you, sir.
I'm not taking it as a criticism. I'm taking it as a discussion. So that's look. I have seen some conference abstracts where people include the citation an in-text citation in the abstract, okay, and then underneath the written abstract, they include, the 1 or 2 references that they're citing below the written abstract itself. That it will really depend on what the conference allows.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think I have ever included an in-text citation or a reference into a conference abstract.
Right.
I'll flag the nature of the background research in the abstract. Then in the conference presentation, that is outlined in more detail with the references. But as I said, like every conference is different, and it will also depend, I guess, also on the discipline as well.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I'm quite happy for my email address to be passed on to all the participants as well.
Yes, Taraka.
So even we can share the chat box.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Can you like copy and paste it there? Like
I will put.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I could put it in the chat if that's easier. Up to you.
Yeah. If you can do it yourself, that will be okay.
Okay, I'll do that now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so Taraka has, our secretary shares.
Okay, she's beat me to it. My typing skills are very poor. So, thank you.
She's like that, she's very. So we owe a lot to her, like for her, like quick options. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I think we can wind up. Kanishka.
Yeah. So now we have come to the end of the third workshop of the workshop series on research and publication of the IRCHSS 2023. I would like to call upon the conference secretary of the IRCHSS 2023, Dr. Tharaka Anand, to deliver the vote of thanks.
The Dean Faculty of Human Resources Sciences, resource person, my dear colleagues and participants. We have gone through a session that we haven't usually joined in as staff members and undergraduates. It's about a review process, and it was very informative session. Thank you very much, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Shiranta Hinkenda, for giving us the idea of organizing this workshop series. Dear Dr. Patrick Faulkner, thank you very much for joining with us to share your knowledge with us. Thank you very much, Dr. Taranga Birusurya, for helping in organizing this workshop series. And also especially Dr. Oshan Vedege, thank you very much for helping us in organizing this workshop today. And also I appreciate the support given by all the committee members of the IRCHSS 2023. Thank you, Lahiru, and thank you, Kanishka, and thank you very much for all the participants to join in with us today as well. We invite you to participate in the final workshop on philosophy of research, which will be conducted by Professor Jayadeva Uyangbudu. Thank you very much and have a good evening. Thank you.
So thank you again. Our final workshop of the IRCHSS 2023 workshop series will be held from 2 to 4 p.m. on 3rd May 2022, and it is based on the title, Why Philosophy for Social Research. Professor Jayadeva Uyangbudu from the University of Colombo will be the resource person, and we hope to see you all at the workshop on 3rd of May. Until then, we conclude the session for today. Thank you again and goodbye.
Thank you very much all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.